1395, the most powerful empire in the world sent 60,000 soldiers into a tiny country called Wallachia. The Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid the Thunderbolt, had crushed everyone who resisted him. Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, all absorbed into his expanding empire. But when Bayezid left Wallachia, he was humiliated. How did this happen? How did a prince with 10,000 soldiers defeat an empire with 60,000? And why does this victory connect directly to the man who would become history's most brutal ruler, Vlad the Impaler? The answer begins with a man you've never heard of, a strategic genius, a ruthless pragmatist, the grandfather of Dracula. His name was Mircea the Elder, and this is how he became the Ottomans' first Wallachian nightmare. To understand how Mircea achieved the impossible, you need to understand what he faced. By the 1380s, the Ottoman Empire wasn't just powerful, it was unstoppable. Every Christian nation that resisted Ottoman expansion had been conquered. The Byzantine Empire, once the greatest power in the Mediterranean, was reduced to the city of Constantinople and a few scattered territories. The Serbian Empire, which had dominated the Balkans for centuries, was crushed at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. Bulgaria fell, Greece fell, Hungary was next. The pattern was clear. Nations faced the Ottomans, nations fell. This was the inevitable arc of the 14th century, and then there was Wallachia. Wallachia was small, mountainous, poor. It had no grand cities, no massive armies, no legendary fortifications. On paper, Wallachia should have been conquered within weeks, but Wallachia had something the Ottomans didn't expect. It had Mircea. Mircea inherited the throne on September 23, 1386, when he was approximately 30 years old. His half-brother Dan I had just died fighting Bulgarian forces. The Wallachian Boyar Council, the assembly of high nobility, selected Mircea as the next voivode. He inherited a principality facing extinction. To the south, the Ottoman Empire was entering a new phase of aggressive expansion under Sultan Bayezid I, who had ascended to power in 1389 and immediately embarked on a campaign of Balkan conquest. To the west, the Hungarian kingdom sought to control Wallachian territory and commerce, particularly access to Danube trading routes and Black Sea ports. Mircea was surrounded, outnumbered, outmatched. Most rulers would have accepted vassalage immediately, paid tribute, bowed, survived. Mircea looked at that inevitable arc and said no, not because he thought he could win permanently, but because he refused to surrender without resistance. But here's what most people don't understand about Mircea's refusal. It wasn't bravado, it wasn't pride, it was cold calculation. Mircea was always thinking 3 moves ahead, and by 1394 those 3 moves ahead were about to converge into something the Ottoman Empire had never experienced before. In 1391, Ottoman forces invaded Wallachia and defeated Wallachian forces in battle. Mircea was forced to accept Ottoman vassalage, paying tribute in exchange for limited autonomy. But Mircea never intended to remain a vassal. While he paid tribute publicly, he was preparing something unprecedented privately. For an entire year, from 1393 to 1394, Mircea didn't sit idle. He fortified the Danube, he organized his armies, he positioned his forces strategically across terrain he knew intimately. But most importantly, he did something generals rarely dare attempt. He created uncertainty. He spread rumors. He exaggerated reports of his strength. He conducted small ambushes just to give the impression of a larger, more coordinated resistance. Ottoman scouts brought contradictory reports back to Bayezid. Was Mircea's army 15,000 soldiers, or 20,000? Were the fortifications along the Danube impenetrable, or just for show? Was Wallachia preparing for defense or planning an offensive? Mircea had successfully created uncertainty in Ottoman minds. This was his genius, not in what he did, but in what he made the Ottomans think he did. But Mircea's most brutal decision was still to come. Here's the brutal part. Mircea ordered the complete evacuation of Wallachia's southern territories. Entire villages burned, fields torched, food stores poisoned, wells contaminated, bridges destroyed. His own people were suffering for his strategy. But why would a leader destroy his own country? Because the Ottomans had to face an impossible landscape with no resources, no supply lines, nowhere to rest. This wasn't cruelty. This was the survival strategy. A man doing what his nation required. Mircea understood something crucial about medieval warfare. You don't need to destroy an army in battle. You just need to make their invasion unsustainable. Starve them, exhaust them, make every mile they advance cost more than they can afford. By the time Bayezid's army crossed the Danube in May 1395, the Ottoman Sultan was walking into a trap that Mircea had spent an entire year constructing. A trap so perfect that the Sultan wouldn't understand it until it was too late. But wait until you see what happened when those 60,000 Ottoman soldiers finally met Mircea's 10,000 defenders. On May 17th, 1395, Sultan Bayezid I personally led a massive Ottoman army into Wallachia, 60,000 soldiers, the finest military force in the world, janissaries, elite infantry trained from childhood, heavy cavalry that had broken every enemy formation, light cavalry for reconnaissance and harassment, archers, engineers, supply trains. This was the army that had conquered the Balkans. This was the force that had crushed Serbian resistance at Kosovo. This was the military machine that made Christian Europe tremble. Bayezid expected easy victory. He thought he was walking into an ordinary battle. He was walking into his humiliation. The Ottoman army, accustomed to open plains where their cavalry dominated, found themselves in the one environment where their numbers meant nothing: Wallachia's forests and swamps. The terrain prevented systematic deployment. Ottoman heavy cavalry couldn't maneuver. Infantry formations broke apart navigating through marshland. Supply wagons bogged down in mud. And then Mircea struck. Wallachian archers positioned on elevated terrain rained arrows on Ottoman forces struggling through marshes. Ottoman light cavalry attempting to flank Wallachian positions became bogged down in the terrain. Ottoman infantry advanced but encountered prepared Wallachian positions and fierce resistance. The battle wasn't a single engagement. According to some Ottoman sources, it lasted an entire week. A war of positions where Wallachian forces conducted hit-and-run attacks, withdrew, repositioned, and attacked again. Small Wallachian units attacked Ottoman supply lines, prevented adequate provisioning, created fear and uncertainty among Ottoman troops. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the physical combat. Ottoman soldiers, men who had crushed everyone else, found themselves unable to break through Wallachian lines or make meaningful progress. The retreat became a rout. Turkish soldiers died, officers were targeted, supply lines cut. Bayezid, recognizing that the military situation threatened to become a catastrophe, eventually ordered a withdrawal. The Ottoman army retreated back across the Danube. The Sultan, personally humiliated, barely escaped with his life. And that's how it happened. Every preparation, every strategy, every psychological tactic converged in that moment. The trap was perfect. 10,000 soldiers had defeated 60,000. A small Wallachian prince had humiliated the Ottoman Sultan. The impossible had become reality. This victory proved something previously impossible. The Ottoman Empire could be defeated. Within a year, news of Rovin's victory spread throughout Christian Europe. King Sigismund of Hungary organized what would become one of the last major crusades of the Middle Ages, the Crusade of Nicopolis, inspired by Mircea's success. One battle, one small nation, one strategic genius, one victory that echoed through centuries. But here's what most historians don't mention. Victory came at a cost that would define Mircea's next 20 years, because defeating the Ottomans militarily was easy compared to what came next. When the Sultan left, Wallachia was in ruins. The scorched earth strategy had worked. The Ottomans were defeated, but Mircea's own country was devastated. Villages destroyed, fields burned, food supplies ruined, his own people starving. Mircea had achieved military victory, but the cost was higher than the benefit. This is the brutal calculus of survival. To save your nation, you might have to destroy it first. And then came the Crusade of Nicopolis. In 1396, King Sigismund of Hungary assembled a grand coalition of Christian forces. Crusaders from France, Burgundy, and other Western territories joined Hungarian and Wallachian armies to capitalize on Mircea's victory and roll back Ottoman expansion. Mircea participated in the crusade as an ally of Sigismund, bringing Wallachian forces to support the Christian coalition. But on September 25, 1396, the crusade ended in crushing defeat. The French knights, impatient for immediate action and eager for military glory, launched a frontal assault against Bayezid's position without proper reconnaissance or coordination. They were surrounded and overwhelmed. Mircea's Wallachian forces, seeing the Crusaders routed, withdrew from the field. The battle was lost, and when Mircea returned to Wallachia, he found himself unpopular with significant portions of his population. The crushing defeat, despite being primarily the fault of French strategic incompetence, was attributed in part to Wallachian participation. Many Wallachians felt that the crusade had been a waste of resources. Mircea's prestige, so elevated by the victory at Ravine just a year earlier, suffered significantly. Complicating matters further, a pro-Ottoman faction within the Wallachian boyar class mounted a coup. They elevated a man named Vlad I, known as the Usurper, to the throne. Vlad ruled from October 1394 to January 1397, pursuing a decidedly pro-Ottoman foreign policy. But with support from King Sigismund and Hungarian military assistance, Mircea organised his supporters and defeated the usurper in 1397. Mircea was restored to the throne, and this is when Mircea understood something crucial. You can win a battle and lose everything afterward. Military victory wasn't enough. He needed a different strategy, so he became what medieval sources called a kingmaker. Darker than direct warfare, yes. More effective, absolutely. In 1402, something extraordinary happened that changed everything for Mircea. Timur Tamerlane, the Central Asian conqueror, defeated Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I at the Battle of Ankara. Bayezid was captured in person, the only Ottoman Sultan ever to be captured in battle, and died in captivity in 1403. This triggered the Ottoman interregnum, a civil war among Bayezid's sons that lasted until 1413. Suleiman, Isa, Mehmed, Musa. Each brother claimed the Ottoman throne and ruled different portions of Ottoman territory. The empire that had seemed unstoppable was tearing itself apart, and Mircea saw this as an opportunity. By 1403 to 1404, Mircea had extended Wallachian control to include Silistra and significant territories south of the Danube, including Dobruja, giving Wallachia direct access to the Black Sea coast and maritime trade routes. Mircea may have supported different Ottoman claimants at different times, playing Ottoman princes against each other to prevent anyone from unifying the empire and turning full attention to Wallachia. It was said that Mircea provided military support to Musa Çelebi, one of Bayezid's sons, though Musa was eventually deposed by his brother Mehmed. This was creative manipulation. Mircea funded Ottoman princes. He created the civil war. He manipulated the empire from within. This was pure survival strategy, a man doing what his nation required. By 1404, Mircea had reached the height of his power. The Wallachian Principality controlled the largest territory in its entire history, extending from the Banat in the west through Transylvania to the Black Sea in the east, and from the Carpathians in the north through the Danube Valley in the south. His official title reflected this extensive territorial reach: Single Ruler Io Mircea, Great Ruler and Sir with the mercy of God, possessing the whole country of Ungro-Wallachia and parts of the mountains, even to parts Tartar and Herseg, Duke of Amlas and Phagas, and ruler of the Banat of Severin, and both sides over all Podunavia, by the Danube, even to the Great Sea, Black Sea. This three-move-ahead thinking had paid off. While other rulers fought battles, Mircea was playing chess, but the restoration of Ottoman unity under Mehmed I in 1413 ended the interregnum period and brought renewed Ottoman pressure, and Mircea, now in his early 60s, faced a newly hostile Ottoman Empire. In 1416, Mircea provided military support to a claimant challenging Mehmed I's authority. This intervention backfired catastrophically. Once Mehmed I defeated his challengers, he launched a punitive campaign against Wallachia. Ottoman forces attacked and seized the key fortresses of Giurgiu and Turnu on the Danube. Mircea also lost the territory of Dobruja. Faced with this Ottoman pressure and advanced age, Mircea negotiated a peace treaty with Sultan Mehmed I in 1417. The terms included recognition of Ottoman suzerainty and annual tribute payments of 3,000 ducats yearly. But the treaty also secured important concessions that preserved Wallachian essential interests. Wallachia retained significant internal autonomy. The Orthodox Christian faith was maintained as the state religion. No mosques were built north of the Danube. Wallachia retained the principality form of government with native voivodes rather than being incorporated directly into Ottoman administrative structures. This 1417 treaty established the template for what would become the tributary system that characterized Wallachian-Ottoman relations for the next several centuries. Mircea had achieved something remarkable. He had preserved Wallachian independence, not complete independence, but the essential features of Wallachian statehood, while adapting to geopolitical reality. As Mircea aged, moving from the brutality of direct warfare into the subtle, darker game of political manipulation, he wasn't retreating from power. Instead, he was transforming it, moving from warrior to strategist, from soldier to kingmaker. This shift would define his later years, and it would define his family's future. Mircea the Elder died on January 31st, 1418, after 32 years on the throne. He was buried in Kozia Monastery, the great religious institution he had founded in 1387, a masterpiece of medieval Wallachian architecture that still stands today. When Mircea died, he left behind more than just monuments and territory. He left a legacy of ruthlessness, a playbook for survival against impossible odds, a family that had learned through generation after generation that you survive through intelligence, manipulation, and when necessary, brutality. Mircea married Doamna Mara, a Hungarian Catholic noblewoman. Through this marriage, Mircea fathered 4 legitimate sons who all achieved prominence in Wallachian history. Michael I, his eldest legitimate son and designated heir, who succeeded him as voivode, Radu II Prasnoglava, Alexander I Aldea, known as Alexander the Good, and Vlad II Dracul. Vlad II Dracul, the father of the legendary Vlad the Impaler. Like his father before him, Vlad Dracul faced Ottoman pressure, and like his father he made pragmatic, ruthless choices. He sent his sons to Ottoman court as hostages, a common diplomatic practice that guaranteed loyalty. One of those sons would be raised in the Ottoman court, fluent in their language, understanding their tactics, learning their methods of psychological warfare. That son was Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler inherited absolutely everything from his grandfather Mircea. The ruthlessness, the strategic brilliance, the willingness to destroy, to preserve, the understanding that survival requires doing what others won't. Mircea invented the playbook, Dracula just played it more brutally. The scorched earth tactics, Mircea did it first. The psychological warfare, Mircea perfected it. The willingness to sacrifice everything, including your own people, to preserve independence, that was Mircea's lesson. Dracula wasn't born from madness. He inherited strategy from his grandfather. What we do echoes through generations. Mircea's ruthlessness didn't die with him. It was passed like a family legacy to men who had become even more ruthless. This is why Mircea matters. Not just because he defeated the Ottomans at Rovine, not just because he expanded Wallachian territory to its greatest extent, not just because he preserved Wallachian independence through 3 decades of Ottoman pressure, but because he created a dynasty that understood survival requires ruthlessness, and that dynasty produced the man who had become history's most brutal ruler and the inspiration for the most famous vampire in literature. One small nation, one strategic genius, one battle that echoed through centuries, and one family that learned that to survive impossible odds, you must become impossible yourself. Mircea the Elder, the grandfather of Dracula, the man who humiliated the Ottoman Sultan, the strategic genius who transformed Wallachia from a minor principality into a regional power, the ruthless pragmatist who understood that survival requires doing what others won't. This is how Dracula's grandfather became the Ottomans' first Wallachian nightmare. If you want to see how Vlad the Impaler took his grandfather's lessons and amplified them into legend, click on this next video. That story is even darker. Subscribe for more dark history, hit the notification bell, and remember, history's greatest monsters often learned from history's greatest heroes.